The luxurious five-star restaurant buzzed with the murmurs of the wealthy elite, their laughter mingling with the soft clinking of silverware against fine china. A young man, barely in his 20s, sat at a prime table by the window, basking in the glow of his own arrogance. Ethan Montgomery, heir to a billion-dollar real estate empire, lounged in his designer suit, swirling a glass of vintage wine in his hand. His father had built an empire from scratch, but Ethan had inherited nothing but entitlement. "Do you see that old man?" Ethan smirked, nudging his friend Lucas, who sat beside him, equally amused. Across the room, a frail, elderly man in a simple, outdated suit hesitantly approached the maitre d'. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his coat pocket for his wallet. "It looks like you walked in here by mistake." Lucas chuckled. Ethan's lips curled into a cruel grin. "Let's have some fun." Rising from his seat, Ethan strode over to the old man, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He dramatically placed a hand on the man's shoulder, feigning concern. "Hey, old-timer, you lost?" His voice dripped with mockery. The elderly man looked up, his kind eyes holding a quiet dignity. "No, young man, I have a reservation." Ethan scoffed loudly, drawing attention from other patrons. "A reservation? Here." He laughed, shaking his head. "Sir, I think you might be in the wrong place. This is Le Chateau, not some greasy diner from back in your day." A few guests chuckled uncomfortably, while others watched in silence. Sensing the tension, the old man gave a small smile, unfazed by the disrespect. "I assure you, I'm in the right place." Ethan folded his arms, turning to the maitre d'. "Come on, you're not seriously going to seat him, are you? This guy probably couldn't afford the breadbasket." The maitre d' hesitated, glancing between the old man and Ethan, clearly torn between protocol and the influence of the wealthy young heir. But before he could respond, a deep, commanding voice rang out from the other side of the restaurant. "Stand down, Ethan. You have no idea who you're talking to." Silence fell over the room. Ethan turned, his smug expression faltering as he saw a man in an expensive suit approaching. It was Richard Langston, one of the most powerful business moguls in the country. And the old man? He was his father. Ethan's cocky smirk disappeared in an instant. His eyes darted between the old man and Richard Langston, a billionaire whose name was synonymous with power and prestige. "Wait, what?" Ethan stammered. The old man, still composed, simply smiled and turned to Richard. "It's good to see you again, Richard. It's been a while." Richard Langston gave the elderly man a respectful nod before turning to Ethan, his sharp eyes filled with disappointment. "Do you have any idea who you just humiliated?" Ethan swallowed hard. Lucas, who had been laughing moments ago, slowly slouched in his chair, suddenly realizing they had made a terrible mistake. The maitre d' looked panicked, immediately stepping forward. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience." The elderly man raised a hand, silencing him. "It's quite all right." He turned back to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Young man, do you even know my name?" Ethan hesitated, looking at him closely for the first time. There was something vaguely familiar about the man, something he couldn't quite place. I don't." Ethan admitted, his voice quieter now. Richard sighed. "This is Henry Langston, my father." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Ethan's blood ran cold. Richard Langston's father? Everyone in the business world knew Richard had built his wealth from an old family foundation, but few knew much about his father. Henry Langston had stepped out of the public eye decades ago, and now, standing before Ethan, he didn't look like the billionaire he had once been. But he was still one of the most respected men in the world. That Ethan's throat went dry. I didn't mean." Henry raised a hand again, silencing him. "Let me tell you a story, young man." The restaurant had fallen completely silent, every patron listening intently. Even the waiters stopped in their tracks, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan could do nothing but listen, and what Henry Langston said next made his stomach drop. Henry Langston pulled out a chair and sat down gracefully, folding his hands on the table. The entire restaurant was eerily silent, eyes glued to the scene unfolding before them. "You see, young man," Henry began, his voice calm but commanding, "I wasn't always the man you see before you. In fact, I started out with nothing. Ethan blinked, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But you're a Langston. You were born rich. A chuckle escaped Henry's lips. Oh no, my boy. The wealth you see today, it wasn't handed to me. My father was a factory worker. We barely had enough to eat most days. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even Richard Langston sat back, listening with deep respect. I worked in warehouses. I scrubbed floors. I delivered newspapers at dawn just to help my family survive. Henry's eyes flickered with nostalgia. When I was your age, I would have given anything to sit in a restaurant like this. Ethan swallowed hard. But you see, money alone doesn't make a man rich. It's character that defines wealth, Henry continued. And tonight, you showed exactly what kind of man you are. Ethan's face burned with embarrassment. He couldn't look at Henry. He couldn't look at anyone. Henry leaned forward. Tell me, young man, do you think you've earned anything in life? Ethan hesitated. My dad worked hard for everything we have. That's right. He did, Henry said pointedly. And you? What have you done? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Henry shook his head. I've seen people like you before, born into privilege, thinking the world is beneath them. But let me tell you something. His eyes hardened. If you lost everything tomorrow, you wouldn't last a day. Ethan flinched. Lucas shifted beside him, clearly wanting to disappear. Henry stood up, straightening his jacket. I didn't come here for a lesson, but life has a funny way of teaching them, doesn't it? Ethan's hands clenched under the table. Now, Henry said, turning to Richard, shall we eat? Or would you rather I leave? Richard smiled. You're always welcome, father. He glanced at Ethan one last time. Always. The weight of those words crushed Ethan's chest. The staff hurried to set up a new table for Henry, treating him with the kind of respect Ethan had foolishly denied him. And as Ethan sat there, staring at the man he had just humiliated, one painful thought echoed in his mind. What have I done? Ethan's mind was racing. He had spent his whole life believing wealth meant power, that money automatically placed you above others. Yet, here was Henry Langston, a man with more wealth and influence than he could ever dream of, and he had just been humbled in front of an entire restaurant. The worst part? His father had let it happen. Richard Langston turned his attention to Ethan. His face wasn't angry, just disappointed. That made it even worse. Ethan, Richard said, placing his napkin on the table, come with me. Ethan hesitated, glancing at his friends, who sat frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. Lucas gave him a wary look, as if silently warning him not to dig himself into a deeper hole. But what choice did he have? Swallowing his pride, Ethan stood and followed his father out of the restaurant, his heart pounding with every step. Outside, the cool evening air did little to calm the storm brewing inside him. Richard stopped near the valet station and turned to face his son. You embarrass me tonight, he said, his voice measured but firm. Ethan clenched his jaw. Dad, I didn't know who he was. That's exactly the problem. Richard's gaze didn't waver. You shouldn't have to know someone's wealth or status to treat them with basic respect. Ethan looked away, crossing his arms. I was just joking around. He looked out of place. Richard exhaled sharply. And why did he look out of place to you, Ethan? Ethan hesitated. He knew the answer, but saying it out loud felt wrong. You've been given everything, yet you still act as if you've earned the right to belittle people, Richard continued. Let me tell you something. Henry Langston didn't inherit his fortune. He built it from nothing. Ethan's stomach churned with guilt. I've let you live in a bubble for too long, Richard said. That ends tonight. Ethan's eyes snapped up. What do you mean? Richard pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Yes, I need a one-way ticket. Economy. Ethan's blood ran cold. Richard ended the call and looked at his son. Tomorrow morning, you're leaving for 6 months. Ethan's heart pounded. Leaving? For where? A place where you'll learn what life is like without luxury. Richard's face was unreadable. Somewhere you'll have to work for what you have. Panic gripped Ethan's chest. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Richard Langston's voice was final. You wanted to act superior? Let's see how superior you feel when you have to earn your way through life. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the look in his father's eyes silenced him. For the first time in his life, Ethan Langston felt powerless. The next morning, Ethan's world turned upside down. His father wasn't bluffing that a chauffeur didn't drive him to a private jet or a luxury vacation. Instead, he was dropped off at the airport with a single suitcase and a one-way ticket to a small, working-class town he had never even heard about in a trust fund. No credit cards, no expensive watch, just enough cash to last 1 week. "Dad, come on, this is crazy," Ethan pleaded at the terminal. Richard Langston remained unfazed. "You'll be staying with an old friend of mine. He owns a construction company. You'll work for him. You'll earn your own money. And if you don't eat." Ethan scoffed. "You expect me to build houses?" Richard's face hardened. "I expect you to learn how the real world works. That's what Henry Langston did when he was your age. That's what I did when I was your age. And now, it's your turn." Ethan's stomach churned. This wasn't a punishment. It was a sentence. "Dad, I don't know how to do any of that," he admitted. Richard gave a small nod. "Then I suggest you learn." Before Ethan could protest again, his father turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. Just another nameless traveler in an airport full of people who didn't care who he was. For the first time in his life, Ethan was truly alone. The town was nothing like what he was used to. No skyscrapers, no fancy restaurants, no sports cars lining the streets. Just modest houses, local diners, and people who actually talked to each other instead of scrolling on their phones. When he arrived at his new home, he was greeted by a burly man in his 50s, wearing a dusty flannel and worn-out jeans. His name was Mike Carson, and he wasn't impressed. "So, you're the spoiled kid who needs a wake-up call," Mike said, arms crossed. Ethan bristled. "I wouldn't put it that way." Mike smirked. "Your father did." Ethan sighed. "How long do I have to be here?" Mike clapped a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Depends on how fast you learn." And just like that, Ethan Langston, the heir to a billion-dollar empire, found himself waking up at 5 a.m. the next morning, standing on a construction site, holding a shovel. IT was the beginning of the hardest and most important lesson of his life. Ethan stood in the morning chill, his designer sneakers already coated in dust. His back ached from the stiff mattress he had slept on the night before. Nothing like the silk-sheeted luxury he was used to. Mike Carson tossed him a pair of work gloves. "Hope you're ready, rich boy." Ethan looked around. The construction site buzzed with activity. Men lifting heavy beams, mixing cement, hammering nails into wooden frames. He had never seen people work this hard up close. Mike led him to a pile of cement bags. "First job, carry these over to the foundation." Ethan frowned. "Aren't there machines for this?" Mike chuckled. "Yeah, they're called hands." The workers nearby laughed. Ethan's face burned. Grumbling under his breath, he bent down to lift a bag. The moment he tried to hoist it up, pain shot through his arms. It was way heavier than it looked. "Having trouble?" one of the workers teased. "I got it," Ethan snapped, gritting his teeth. He struggled but managed to lift it. Step by step, he staggered toward the foundation, his arms trembling from the weight. By the time he dropped the bag, his back was soaked in sweat. Mike clapped. "Only 39 more to go." Ethan's jaw dropped. "You're joking." Mike didn't smile WY noon. Ethan's muscles burned in places he didn't even know existed. His palms were red and sore, his clothes stained with dust and sweat. For the first time in his life, he envied the men working beside him. They moved with strength and ease, while he felt like a broken marionette. "Lunch break," someone called. Ethan collapsed onto a wooden crate, gasping. Finally, one of the workers, a burly man named Carlos, handed him a sandwich. Ethan took it eagerly, then froze. "Wait, no caviar? No truffle oil?" he joked weakly. Carlos smirked. "No, but it's got hard work and reality in it. Eat up." Ethan hesitated, then bit into the sandwich. It was simple, turkey lettuce bread, but somehow it tasted better than anything he had eaten in months. Mike sat next to him. "Tough day." Ethan groaned. "This is insane. How do you guys do this every day?" Mike shrugged. "Because we have to." Ethan fell silent, his privileged world cracking just a little more, that he had always assumed that success came from boardrooms and stock portfolios. But here, in the dust and sweat, he was realizing something he had never understood before. Real power didn't come from wealth. It came from work. The afternoon sun bore down mercilessly, making Ethan's exhaustion even worse. Every muscle in his body screamed. His hands trembled, and blisters were already forming on his once soft palms. He had always taken comfort in knowing that his wealth set him apart, but here, it meant nothing that as he wiped sweat from his forehead, he noticed Mike helping an older worker lift a heavy steel beam. The man's face was lined with age, his hands calloused from years of labor. Yet he didn't complain. Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath and moved toward them. "Here, let me help." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You sure, rich boy?" Ethan didn't bother answering. He positioned himself and lifted. The weight was unbearable, but he gritted his teeth and bore it. The old worker gave him a nod of respect. That be why the time the day ended. Ethan was covered in dirt, sweat, and an exhaustion he had never felt before. But something had shifted inside him. As the workers packed up, he found himself lingering. He didn't want to leave just yet. Mike leaned against a beam. "So what did you learn today?" Ethan exhaled. "That money doesn't make a man valuable. Hard work does." Mike smirked. He might just be teachable after all. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt something he had never experienced before, earned respect. Ethan sat quietly in the study, staring at the heavy wooden desk where his grandfather once sat. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like never before. He had spent days reflecting on everything: the humiliation he caused, the pain he inflicted, and the deep sense of entitlement that had blinded him. The silence was broken by a knock at the door. His father, Richard, stepped in, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding me," Richard said, pulling out a chair across from Ethan. "I assume you've had time to think." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I was wrong, Dad. I see that now. What I did to that man, to Mr. Donovan, it was cruel." Richard studied his son, nodding slightly. "I won't say I told you so, because that wouldn't help. But I will say this, you still have a choice. A choice to remain the same or to become better." Ethan clenched his fists. "I want to change. I don't want to be the person I was." Richard exhaled deeply, as if a burden had been lifted. "Then prove it. Not just to me, but to yourself. Actions speak louder than words, son." Ethan stood up, determination setting into his features. "I will." A week later, Ethan found himself outside the small bookstore where Mr. Donovan worked. It was a modest shop filled with the scent of aged paper and leather-bound covers. When he stepped inside, he found the old man carefully stacking books on a high shelf at Mr. Donovan turned and met Ethan's gaze. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, but he said nothing. Ethan swallowed his pride and took a deep breath. "Mr. Donovan, I need to apologize. What I did to you is inexcusable. I was arrogant, disrespectful, and completely out of line. I can't change what I did, but I want to make it right." Mr. Donovan studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Acknowledging your mistake is a start, but true change takes time." Ethan nodded. "Then let me prove it to you, however long it takes." With that, he rolled up his sleeves and began sorting books beside the old man, knowing that redemption was a journey, and he was just getting started.